This video was literally brought to you by GeForce NOW. My old GPU died right when I got this game, and I played through most of it on GeForce NOW. The experience was almost perfect, and I highly recommend it if you're in a pinch. I will do my very best to keep this spoiler free. Besides this shot right here, I will not include any footage from the last quarter or third of the game. But this is a response video, and I am going to be showing footage throughout most of the rest of the game, and even just new gameplay elements that are unlocked can be spoilers. So be aware, this was best enjoyed after completing Death Stranding. I want to open by saying I was originally making a very different Death Stranding video, and I was blessed by a situation much like what happened in the creation of Silent Hill 2, where Team Silent had a computer crash and lost some progress, but decided that maybe they were going too far with that scene. And I think I was doing that a little bit with my original video, where I was kind of going point for point of how Death Stranding almost insults you for not playing it a certain way, and then in its meta sort of goes on with some certain philosophical ideals that may just, let's say, make a few people angry while playing it by basically saying, if you play the game the way it wants to be played, you're smart. If you run through the valleys and try to shoot guys, you're maybe not smart. And that is a thing. Let's just briefly kind of summarize. This is the first game of visionary creator Hideo Kojima away from the overbearing parent company of Konami. And he had all the money and all the things, and he rewarded himself with a couple of new jobs, like casting director, where he filled the game with all of his favorite actors and most of his personal and professional friends. He also acts as the music producer and fills the soundtrack with his favorite bands and many of his favorite songs. And it really goes that full level and then philosophizes at you that basically, if you like my games, you're smart. And yeah, that's a thing. It is. He even goes so far as to reference this book by this guy, which, oh boy, Johann Huizinga? You know what, I'm sorry, any Dutch viewers, but I'm not even going to get into this. You can look up this book if you're curious about that. But Kojima's interpretation of the theory very much... Yeah, I'm going to just leave it there. It pretty much says, if you like his games, you're one of the good ones. If you don't, you're not. And that is a thing in this game. But all of that being said, let me tell you why I really, really enjoyed this game. Probably my favorite thing about Death Stranding is the player choice driven gameplay, and specifically it rewards you for choosing to pay attention to and invest in its mechanics and systems. For example, in this part, I'm using the fact that the mules, the game's raiders, will ping me when I enter their territory. And so I've intentionally gotten myself pinged by their radar in the middle of a creek, and they're not terribly smart, so they'll investigate into the middle of the creek, making it easy for me to jump them, take out as many of them as possible, and leave their camp lightly guarded. Now the goal through all of this is for me to take their resources, load them up in their truck, drive off, and build myself infrastructure like zip lines and bridges so I can completely bypass the valley they're in and not have to deal with them in the future. Now this is the kind of thinking that the game rewards, the idea of obstacles being opportunities in order to grind resources to invest in the game's systems and build things to bypass the obstacles. On the other hand, if you just sort of take the most direct route and run through the valley, you're going to encounter a lot of the game's cargo-destroying timefall rain, different sorts of BTs, which are the ghost-like entities that you may have seen from trailers, and many of the aforementioned mules and also terrorists who will try to stop your progress. And it generally just makes the game harder if you try to take the most direct route, whereas it significantly rewards you if you go off the beaten path and make yourself shortcuts, bypass routes, generally just sort of go your own way and use the tools that the game provides you as you go along. And if you do generally invest in these systems and play the game it wants to be played, which I generally did, it rewards you by making you feel like the cleverest person in the world as you bypass your enemies and use the fancy gear you've unlocked to traverse difficult terrain, zip over their heads on zip lines, or make bridges to cross difficult rivers that otherwise you would have had to go around. These sort of things make you feel really clever as a player, and the game really goes out of its way to do this for you. So I can see how that would be a polarizing element of, people want to play games however they want. I know understand this because this is how I usually want to play games. And most games throw up a lot of invisible walls in my way or tell me I have to run down the hallway and shoot the guys when they jump out and red markers go over their head. And so for me, this game was a huge breath of fresh air because it was letting me play it the way I wanted to play. But it was always pretty visible to me that that was what the game was rewarding me for doing, happened to be my play style and what I wanted to do. I guess that makes me one of Kojima's target audience, but it always very much felt like because I was going down the sort of invisible hallway that the game created for me, it made things much easier for me and rewarded me outright. Whereas if I had generally just sort of plodded through the most direct routes, I can only imagine if I had done 100 of the BT encounters in this game, I would probably hate it, whereas I probably encountered less than a dozen. And these sort of things can definitely change your experience, so I would say that comes down to your play style. If you're the sort of person that's always trying to bypass invisible walls, get out of bounds, jump on top of things in weird ways to just do things your own way and explore, this game is definitely made for you. But if you just want to relax and shoot some dudes, well, killing people at all can create a really bad event in this game, and pretty much you have to kind of tediously go around with non-lethal weapons like rubber bullets and a bullet gun. So yeah, definitely not the game for that, and it will outright punish you for just basically running down the hallway and shooting dudes, for lack of a better description. So you cannot doom it. Before I get into the plot in general, I guess the sort of elephant in the room with Death Stranding is, does the world itself make any blasted sense after you've played the game, read the interview files, done the side quests, pretty much done as much as you can on your part to try and understand what's going on? Does it ever really make any sense, the stuff that you've seen in the crazy trailers? Like, for example, why does Norman Reedus have a jar with a baby inside strapped to his chest? Why do Mads Mikkelsen and Guillermo del Toro seem to be running around in World War II? All sorts of questions like this that seem like they would be the hardest to answer are actually answered pretty well before the game's first set of credits roll. It's the actual mechanics and details of the world that are what are left sort of vague, and that comes down to something that I made a whole video about, and no, I don't actually recommend you go check it out, it was pretty bad. But it's about the difference between mythic and hard sci-fi, and fans of hard sci-fi are always going to be frustrated by mythic sci-fi, and Star Wars is a great example. The Millennium Falcon never runs out of gas, but it always breaks down when it serves the plot. And that's much the way Death Stranding is, where the mechanics and the sci-fi elements in its universe mostly exist to serve the plot, and there is some pseudoscience used to explain things, but it's much like in Star Wars, where there's crystals to focus lightsaber beams, and there's packs full of gas that power blasters. But if you look at stuff really too hard, it gets really pseudoscience-y and starts to not make a whole lot of sense. And that's much of what you're going to get in Death Stranding. And that's something that you just kind of have to be able to live with as an aspect of mythic sci-fi to be able to enjoy stuff like this. Because, to be perfectly honest, some of the most basic questions you have about the world are very well answered, and the sort of plot itself makes a lot of sense. But the actual mechanics of how all of this stuff is going on is, well, let's just say it's much more Star Wars and much less Star Trek. So that's something you kind of have to live with. But it is really enjoyable if you can just kind of sit back and go along for the crazy ride and live with some really out there science fiction concepts as to why the stuff you're seeing is actually going on. As far as the actual character-driven plot, it is actually really good, and again, it's something that you get more out of the more you invest in it. A lot of subplots and side quests, like this one shown here, can seem really trite on first look, but after you complete the first part of them and you get what would be just sort of the vanilla take on it if you don't go back and invest more into the game's side quests, there often is a second or even third or fourth part to quests that actually changes the interpretation and outright changes the outcome. Now, there's also the aspect of some of the other main characters. You get a very basic understanding of them through just going through the main story, but there are other opportunities to further develop their characters, and it really changes the way you feel about them and makes it so that at the end, when you're having your sort of super team up moment, they feel important rather than just annoying people that talk too much. And this is much the same as in the Metal Gear games in the past. If you were the sort of person that spent time on the codec talking to people, you often sort of got to know them, and you wanted to listen to them talk a little bit more. Whereas if you skipped a lot of those conversations and just couldn't wait for them to stop talking, it just became really irritating at the end of the games when those conversations went on and on and on. And Death Stranding does a really good job about that, where if you are interested in the world and you do invest, by the end of the game, it's very moving and very poignant, and the experience that you've gone through with these characters feels very important. Now, the ending is definitely... it's a powerful ending, I guess that's all I'm going to say. It covers familiar ground for stories where you're a parent or a surrogate parent, but it does it in a way that it's really enjoyable in the end. I'm still in sort of what I call the glow after that, so we'll see how I feel in the long run about the ending of the game, but after just completing it, it was very moving, and I felt that the story overall, as far as the character-driven plot, it made sense. I was satisfied with it. I liked what happened with most of the characters. So from that aspect, I felt that Death Stranding was very, very satisfying to me, especially when you sort of dig a little further into these stories and realize that they're not maybe as simple and trite as they appear at first glance if you only do the basic quests you're forced to take. To kind of conclude and wrap up, I guess if I were to try and sum up Death Stranding the way I feel right now after just completing it the first time, is it's a visionary game that it may take us a long time to see the full impact of, but I'm glad I was able to enjoy it right now. That just for me personally, with my gameplay style, I'm glad I was able to enjoy it on first take. But over the years, I think we'll see, in the graphics technology, the design, gameplay systems, much like has happened with all of Kojima's games in the past, honestly, all the ideas have led to a lot more. And so there are things we may look back on and say that was brilliant, we may look back on that and say that was stupid, but I think it may take a little longer to fully evaluate what Death Stranding was as a game. Now, as far as just how enjoyable I guess it was for me to play it, I really, really enjoyed it. I would have to say, I mentioned a little bit of this in a previous video, but I get these sort of doldrums at the end of a console generation, and this happens to me every time, where I just feel like originality is completely dead and nothing new and interesting is going to come along. And new and interesting and different, I would say, are probably some of the first words you would use to describe this game, and for me, it just really kind of struck me deep and changed me in a way, and it revitalized me for a new generation of games. And The Last of Us was like that for me at the end of last generation, and this game very much did that for me, where it's been probably a couple of years since I played a game through that I was completely hooked on, and I thought about it a lot. After I put it down, it rolled around inside my head a bunch. I've been missing that for a while, and this game was that for me, and I really enjoyed that. So regardless of all, obviously I have complaints about the philosophy and the design of the game. It really, for me, was a phenomenal experience, and I'm thankful to the developers for creating it, and I'm glad, I guess, that Kojima and Konami had their breakup, and that Sony decided to step in and put forward just piles of money for him to go absolutely nuts and create this game, because I haven't had an experience like that, at least recently, in any other game. And it's really important to me as, I guess, that kind of that freak gamer, that homo ludens that Kojima wants to make these games for. I feel that a lot of times every game is just putting up sort of walls in my way, and it means a lot to me when I play a game that sort of lets me stretch my legs and open out and do things the way I want. So I really enjoyed that about this experience, and the plot moved me. I gotta say, I'm in the pro club. I know that there's a lot of people that feel strongly about this game, both good and bad. I feel I have mixed feelings, but I really, really enjoyed the experience, and I think it's going to climb, pretty high in my favorite games of certain types or favorite games period lists over time. But I'm definitely also very willing to debate its merits and sort of the philosophy behind it, and if maybe it even was excessive at times, how the game sort of philosophizes at you that if you're impatient or lazy or just want a quick fix from your game, that makes you somehow inferior as a gamer, because it does kind of, it's more than tongue-in-cheek, it's more than light suggestion. It does overtly say that at times, and I think that is kind of a sanctimonious and egotistical way to be, and that's something that Kojima's been accused of in his games before, and I think it was really sort of worn on its sleeve. But all of that being said, of this game basically him saying, hey, this is my game starring me and my friends with all my favorite music, and I did it all my way, and I'm even going to say, if you don't like it, you're a dummy. All that being said, this is still a monumental game, and it was a phenomenal experience. And in the end, it almost kind of, it justifies itself in a way, but I'll probably revisit that opinion again in the future.
Stay away.